The Committee on Science, Space, and Technology will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recesses of the committee at any time, and pursuant to Rule 2F and House Rule 11, recorded votes may be postponed. Today we meet to consider H.R. 6093, the Weather Act Reauthorization of 2023. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Thank you all for joining us for this markup. We're here today to consider the Weather Act Reauthorization, a bill to strengthen American forecasting and emergency preparedness. This bill updates and modernizes the Weather Act of 2017, which was the first comprehensive weather authorization in more than 2 decades. As we started to develop this reauthorization, we held multiple hearings on the Weather Act of 2017, asking what worked, what could be improved. We heard about some tremendous success stories. Because of the Weather Act of 2017, we were able to improve hurricane track predictions by more than 10% and increase tornado warning lead times by more than 10 minutes. We heard about the value of giving NOAA more access to commercial weather data. We heard about the need to address evolving challenges like atmospheric rivers, coastal flooding, storm surges, and aviation weather. After months of feedback from dozens of stakeholders, we've crafted a bill that builds on the successes of the Weather Act while tackling the next generation of forecasting needs. As a farmer and rancher, I am particularly proud that this bill has a strong focus on improving sub-seasonal to seasonal forecasting. This information is critical to decisions on planting and harvesting and helps agricultural producers across the country make better decisions about how they grow America's food and fiber. The bill also helps protect lives and property by strengthening our emergency preparedness. It does that in a few ways. First, by improving our ability to forecast severe weather, and second, by enhancing our ability to quickly and effectively communicate when emergencies are approaching. The everyday citizen needs to know what an EF3 tornado warning means and how to act on it. This bill does that. As we heard repeatedly from stakeholders and NOAA themselves, the 2017 Weather Act provisions to allow NOAA to use commercial weather data were incredibly successful. So this legislation builds out that authority, allowing NOAA to take advantage of new and innovative technologies that provide more data sources than ever before. The bill also improves operational efficiency and cuts red tape by eliminating 15 different reports, plans, or strategies to Congress. This ensures that NOAA is focused on taking action rather than conducting bureaucratic assessments. Taken together, these provisions put the U.S. on a more competitive footing globally when it comes to accurate and effective forecasting. And make no mistakes, superiority in weather forecasting has real economic impacts. Accurate forecasts have significant benefits to our economy, from better crop production to more reliable shipping to the protection of lives and properties during severe storms. The bill before us today includes provisions from 12 individual bills representing the interest of more than 30 members on both sides of the aisle. That number will grow as we adopt additional language today. I don't have time in this brief opening statement to highlight all of that work, but I would like to thank everyone in this room who put forth bills to improve our ability to accurately forecast weather. We also have a number of bipartisan amendments today that I believe will further improve this already strong bill and protect all Americans regardless of geography. I'm looking forward to moving this bill forward through the House and passing it into law. And with that, I now recognize the ranking member for her opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Lucas. As you've mentioned, we're considering this one bill today, and it improves on the 2017 bill that the Science Committee developed and enacted on a bipartisan basis. That was the first comprehensive weather policy legislation in more than 2 decades. That prior legislation, as you've mentioned, helped accelerate innovation in weather forecasting tools and products and strengthened collaboration and cooperation among all stakeholders in the weather enterprise. The bill before us today continues to advance policy to strengthen that and to ensure that NOAA has the tools, the capabilities, and workforce to continue to save lives and protect property as climate change drives more frequent and more severe extreme weather events. Every one of the many important provisions in this legislation was developed thoughtfully with input and feedback from NOAA and external stakeholders, and I'll highlight just a few. I know that many of our colleagues in offering amendments will have the opportunity to call attention to other important parts of the legislation. The bill strengthens research, observations, forecasting, and public communications related to extreme weather events, including hurricanes, tornadoes, tsunamis, coastal flooding, and storm surge. Also on this list, as you've mentioned, are atmospheric rivers, which hit California in unprecedented number and ferocity last winter. They dumped 32 trillion gallons of water in the state in a matter of weeks, and this tragically resulted in 21 deaths, as well as tremendous devastation, not only in my district, but across the state of California. The bill requires the establishment of an atmospheric rivers forecast improvement program to focus on this growing threat to life and property in the West. The bill will help drive the development of novel sensor technologies on diverse observation platforms, expand computational resources to aid forecasters, and strengthen subseasonal to seasonal forecasting capabilities. The legislation will increase NOAA's investment in data assimilation through creation of a program to test, advance, and implement data assimilation methods, a need that we heard repeated several times from experts in our hearings this year. As part of this program, NOAA will direct the creation of a new university-based data assimilation consortium to address critical research challenges and foster a data assimilation workforce. Finally, this bill finds the right balance in expanding NOAA's partnership with the growing commercial weather sector while maintaining a backbone of publicly owned observational capabilities and a capable workforce necessary to avoid any disruption in NOAA's forecasting capabilities. The National Weather Service's mission is the protection of life and property and the enhancement of national security through forecasts and warnings. This bill supports that mission, and I look forward to working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to ensure that all of the activities authorized in this bill are funded in the coming years. I would just note that there are a number of amendments that will be offered. I would urge all of our members to be concise in their comments and to take yes for an answer. And I want to thank Chairman Lucas for his continued partnership in carrying out the work of this committee as reflected in the good bipartisan legislation. And I want to thank the committee staff on both sides of the aisle for their hard work, really over many months, and collaboration. I support the bill, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
The gentlelady yields back and provides wise counsel on the amendment process. Other members are invited to submit opening statements for the record. Pursuant to notice, I now call up H.R. 6093, the Weather Act, Reauthorization Act of 2023. The clerk will report the bill.
H.R. 6093, to improve the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administrator's weather research, support improvements in weather
Without
forecasting.
objection, the bill is considered as read and open for amendment at any point. Does any member wish to be recognized to speak on the underlying bill? Seeing no comments, if there's no further discussion on the underlying bill, we will proceed with amendments in the order listed on the roster. The first amendment on the roster is Lucas Amendment Number 19. The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to H.R. 6093, offered by Mr. Lucas of Oklahoma.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read, and I recognize myself to explain the amendment. This manager's amendment makes a number of technical and minor changes throughout the bill. Among them, we ensure models with national security implications are protected. The proper term for radar interference is used, and the correct names of NOAA's coordinating councils are referenced. I'm proud of many things related to this bill, but perhaps the most meaningful thing to me is the open, transparent, and deliberative process we took in drafting this bill. For those that don't remember, one of the first hearings we had on the committee this Congress was entitled Reauthorizing the Weather Act, Data Innovation for Predictions, and that took place in March. We followed that up with another hearing in June and circulated discussion drafts of the bill shortly thereafter. We received hundreds of comments and have 21 letters of support from stakeholders. We even had hours-long discussions with NOAA to make sure they were comfortable with congressional intent and could implement this language. This amendment is one last push to make those small changes that will make everyone happy. This is the way legislation should be developed, thoroughly through a nearly year-long process that takes place in full public view and incorporates government and private interest. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time. Does any other member wish to be recognized to speak on the amendment? The ranking member is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, just briefly, I agree with your description of the amendment and support it.
Are there others seeking to be recognized on this? Hearing no others, the question is on agreeing to Lucas Amendment number 19. All in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do indeed have it. The amendment is agreed to. The next amendment on the roster is offered by the gentlewoman from Oregon, Mrs. Bonamici. The clerk will read Bonamici Amendment number 87.
Amendment to H.R. 6093, offered by Ms. Bonamici of Oregon and Mr. Isa of California.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read, and the gentlewoman from Oregon is recognized to explain her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to you and to Ranking Member Lofgren for your leadership on this underlying legislation. My bipartisan amendment, which is co-sponsored by Mr. Isa of California, includes provisions from my bipartisan Tsunami Warning Research and Education Amendments Act to reauthorize and strengthen the Tsunami Forecasting and Warning Program at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. This critical program was created to improve tsunami preparedness for vulnerable coastal communities by providing outreach and education and enhancing tsunami detection and alerts. The authorization for this program expires this year. We must extend and improve NOAA's tsunami warning research and education services to keep coastal communities safe. The Weather Act of 2017 updated the Tsunami Warning Program and also created the Tsunami Science and Technology Advisory Panel. And that advisory panel is a group of non-federal scientists, which included, I want to note, Professor Diego Melgar, a faculty member at my alma mater, the University of Oregon, and they provided a clear message in their report. Our tsunami warning system and warning centers need urgent improvements. And the panel made clear that technological inconsistencies between NOAA's 2 warning centers and also growing populations on coasts present major risks to our emergency preparedness. So this amendment will address the recommendations made by the panel. Specifically, the amendment will improve tsunami forecasting data sharing and also encourage research and development in real-time detection technologies. It will integrate tsunami data and notifications with earthquake warning systems to streamline coordination between federal agencies. It is oftentimes an earthquake that causes a tsunami. Importantly, by including regional and hazard risk assessments to the National Tsunami Hazard Mitigation Program, this amendment will improve research on inundation and debris effects, critical infrastructure, digital elevation models, and also behavioral science to bolster resilience efforts. Seaside, Oregon, which is a coastal community in the district I represent, is at high risk from tsunami because of low elevation. They know where to go and when to leave after an earthquake. They know that that's a matter of life and death. This amendment will expand regional education and outreach by NOAA to make Seaside and all coastal communities better prepared for future disasters. So, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member and colleagues, the gaps in our existing warning system are clear. By expanding access to data and modernizing this detection technology, improving alert education, this bipartisan amendment will make coastal communities safer and more resilient. Thank you again to my colleague, Mr. Isa, for co-sponsoring the amendment. I encourage all my colleagues to support it, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. I recognize myself for 5 minutes on the amendment. I want to thank Mr. Isa and Ms. Bonamici for leading on this topic, which they also did in the original Weather Act of 2017. It's nice to see them team up again 6 years later for the reauthorization package, and I support this amendment, and I urge its passage or adoption, and I yield back. Does any other member wish to be recognized to speak on the amendment?
Mr. Chairman?
The ranking member is recognized for 5 minutes.
I want to join you in thanking Congresswoman Bonamici as well as Mr. Isa. The tsunami event is a matter not of if, but when, and this is a very important amendment which I support, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Does anyone else seek to be recognized on this subject matter? The gentleman, Mr. Zinke, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Go Ducks.
Gentleman yields back. Hearing no others, the question is on agreeing to the Bonamici Amendment number 87. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes appear to have it. They do indeed have it, and the amendment is agreed to. The next amendment on the roster is offered by the gentleman from California, Mr. Obernolte. The clerk will read Obernolte Amendment number 49.
Amendment to H.R. 6093, offered by Mr. Obernolte of California.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read, and the gentleman from California is recognized to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank you and the ranking member for offering up the Weather Act, which reauthorizes some very worthwhile and meaningful programs. I'd like to offer this common sense amendment that adds the National Landslide Hazard Reduction Program to the list of programs that we are reauthorizing. Landslides are probably the most overlooked natural disasters in the United States because they're often associated with other weather events, but they can have a devastating impact on our communities. On average, landslides cause hundreds of deaths a year and over $1 billion of economic damage. This is something that I unfortunately am personally acquainted with. In August, California experienced the first tropical storm that we have seen in almost 100 years. That brought record levels of rainfall into my communities, and that created liquefaction of some soil that had been destabilized by forest fires and created really devastating landslides in a lot of the communities that I represent. And we are still cleaning up from the results of that natural disaster. I personally toured some of those areas that were affected, and I can tell you the power of that much moving earth is difficult to fathom. There were entire houses that were swept away, bridges that were swept away, entire sections of road and highway were swept away. We had to airlift and evacuate entire communities because they could not be reached anymore. And the communities affected are still trying to clean up. We've got a whole section, a major section of highway. That's one of the major arteries into several of the mountain communities that I represent, including the one I live in, that is still not repaired. We're hoping to get it back up in the next month or so. So anything that we can do to improve the forecasting of those events and to help communities prepare, I think is very worthwhile. This program has been very effective. It's a joint program that's led by the USGS, NOAA, and the NSF. What it does is it creates better prediction tools for landslides and gives communities tools to prepare for the effects of landslides. This amendment would reauthorize it for another 4 years. Without this amendment, it will expire at the end of this fiscal year. The amendment would simply reauthorize it until 2028. I think it's worthy of consideration. I respectfully request your aye vote on the amendment and on the underlying bill. I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the ranking member for 5 minutes on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Representative Obernolte for this amendment. As a fellow Californian, unfortunately, I know too well the destructive and often deadly consequences of landslides. But actually, there's a higher risk of landslides in any part of the West that's scarred by wildfires, and there's landslides occur in all 50 states. So this is an important amendment. I want to thank him, Mr. Obernolte, for offering it, and I support it and yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes on the amendment. I thank the gentleman from California, Mr. Obernolte, for leading this amendment that is so critical to his constituents back home, and I support this amendment and urge its adoption, and I yield back. Does any other member wish to be recognized to speak on the amendment? Hearing no others, the question is on agreeing to Obernolte Amendment number 49. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed signify by saying no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes appear to have it. They do indeed have it. The amendment is agreed to. The next amendment on the roster is offered by the gentlewoman from Oregon, Ms. Bonamici. The clerk will read Bonamici Amendment number 88.
Amendment to H.R. 6093, offered by Ms. Bonamici of Oregon and Mr. Posey of Florida.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read, and the gentlewoman from Oregon is recognized to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Chairman Lucas and Ranking Member Lofgren. My amendment, co-sponsored by Mr. Posey of Florida, includes provisions from my bipartisan Harmful Algal Bloom and Hypoxia Research and Control Amendments Act, which would prepare and protect communities and ecosystems from the devastating effects of harmful algal blooms, also known as HABs, and hypoxia events. A combination of heat, decaying vegetation, and human activity in water systems cause HABs to occur with increasing frequency. HABs produce a type of bacteria that can accumulate in high doses in aquatic wildlife. If consumed, it can cause short-term memory loss, seizures, coma, and even death. Hypoxia, or low levels of oxygen, is caused by increased water temperature and excess nutrients, and it causes die-off of fish, shellfish, coral, and aquatic plants. My amendment would improve monitoring, research, and community and federal response to HABs and hypoxia events to protect and prevent and control disasters in our water systems. According to the National Centers for Coastal Ocean Science, a single major HABs event can cost up to $100 million in seafood supply disruption, environmental damage, and health effects. Dead zones caused by hypoxia can destabilize fish and shellfish stocks and also kill off entire populations of aquatic species. Astoria, a coastal city in the district I represent, is home to one of 2 labs that test for HABs in Oregon. This amendment will streamline assessments to better understand the causes of HABs and hypoxia and their economic and sociocultural effects. Additionally, this amendment will establish the National HAB Observing Network to leverage ongoing monitoring and forecasting projects. It will also authorize the HABs Control Technologies Incubator Program at NOAA to encourage development and employment of cutting-edge monitoring technologies. Harmful algal blooms can occur in any water systems, not just in coastal communities. Earlier this year, we had a month-long HABs event in the Willamette River in Oregon. It also happens in the Great Lakes and other bodies of water. There was a time, I don't see Mr. Posey here today, but there was a time when Lake Okeechobee in Florida was referred to as a bowl of guacamole. Mr. Chairman, harmful algal blooms and hypoxia events threaten the health of our marine and freshwater ecosystems and our communities. My bipartisan amendment will improve research and coordination at NOAA and the EPA, and also help communities better protect against and respond quickly to these disasters. So thank you again to my friend, Mr. Posey, for co-sponsoring this amendment, and to the chairman and ranking member for their work on the underlying legislation. I urge all of my colleagues to support this important bipartisan amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. The chair recognizes himself. For 5 minutes. I want to thank the gentlewoman from Oregon, Ms. Bonamici, and the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Posey, for their leadership on this important topic, which affects both coasts of the country as well as many places in between. I support this amendment, and I urge its adoption. Yield back and recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, as you do, I appreciate the amendment offered by Ms. Bonamici and Mr. Posey. Certainly, this is a problem in coastal areas, but any place where there's water in the country, which is everywhere, faces this issue, and of course, we all eat fish. So this is an important amendment. I support it, and I thank the members for offering it, and yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Does any other member wish to be recognized to speak on the amendment? Hearing no others, the question is on agreeing to the Bonamici Amendment number 88. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes appear to have it. They do indeed have it. The amendment is agreed to. The next amendment on the roster is offered by the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Jackson. The clerk shall report Jackson Amendment number 26.
Amendment to H.R. 6093, offered by Mr. Jackson of North Carolina.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read, and the gentleman from North Carolina is recognized to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm proud to support this bill and especially glad to see Section 202 included, which tasks NOAA with developing a plan to replace the National Weather Service's Next Generation Weather Radar, or NEXRAD. NEXRAD has done a great job at improving our ability to detect and predict weather nationwide. However, the further you get from a NEXRAD station, the harder it can be to accurately view and predict weather conditions, which can lead to dangerous weather radar blind spots. Earlier this year, I introduced a bill that would help ensure that when we upgrade to a new radar system nationwide in the coming years, special attention is given to areas in these blind spots because of their distance from NEXRAD sites like my district and the city of Charlotte. My amendment ensures that in its plan to upgrade and replace our nation's weather radar system, NOAA will propose expected locations for new next-generation radar stations, including potential sites 75 or more miles away from an existing NEXRAD station. This will help close these gaps and ensure that as many parts of our country as possible have access to high-quality and accurate weather information. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the ranking member for 5 minutes on this amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to thank Representative Jackson for this amendment. He's right. Every part of our country deserves protection. and this amendment will make sure that happens. I support the amendment and yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. I recognize myself for 5 minutes on the amendment. I want to thank the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Jackson, for offering this amendment. I'm happy to say that after the markup today, including the addition of language from 2 of his previous introduced bills, this package will consist of 19 different standalone bills, co-sponsored by a total of almost 50 different members of Congress. I support this amendment and I urge its adoption, and I yield back. Does any other member wish to be recognized to speak on the amendment?
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the word.
The gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Colleagues, as a meteorologist here in Congress, I really appreciate the gentleman from North Carolina bringing this to us today. A dear friend of mine, Mr. Brad Panovich at WCNC-TV in Charlotte, North Carolina, has tracked countless thunderstorms and tornadoes through the Charlotte metro area. We've got a problem here because the radar cannot see the tornadoes as they are forming. And so the gentleman's amendment is going to allow us to ensure safety for the people of North Carolina. And I appreciate you bringing this up, and I wish every colleague to support this. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Does any other member wish to be recognized to speak on the amendment? Hearing no others, the question is on agreeing to the Jackson Amendment number 26. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do indeed have it, and the amendment is agreed to. The next amendment on the roster is offered by the gentlewoman from Ohio, Mrs. Sykes. The clerk will read the Sykes Amendment number 48.
Amendment to H.R. 6093, offered by Ms. Sykes of Ohio.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read, and the gentlewoman from Ohio is recognized to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First and foremost, I want to thank you and Ranking Member Lofgren for convening this full committee meeting and your staff's hard work for putting this together. We've missed you, so good to see you all. As you all know, Mr. Chairman, I am very proud to be from Ohio, where we often experience 4 seasons in just 1 week, as we did last week. And that said, I am proud that with this legislation, we are making notable improvements to forecast hazardous weather communications that keep our constituents informed and safe. My constituents in Ohio's 13th Congressional District will greatly benefit from the investments being made in cutting-edge forecasting, strengthening emergency preparedness, and providing farmers the tools and services needed for agriculture and water management, all things that this legislation provides for. This is the Science Committee after all, and so I'm especially appreciative that this legislation is maximizing our ability to respond to the many adverse weather conditions that are becoming more and more commonplace across Ohio and the nation as our planet's climate continues to change. For instance, inland flooding is a major issue in my district, especially in the city of Barberton, causing road closures, property damage, and loss. And additionally, I mentioned back in April in this committee, and I'll reiterate it again because it's important to note that agriculture is one of the leading industries in the state. But in 2019, about 63,000 acres of cropland were prevented from being planted because of extreme weather events. That's why enhancing our ability to predict weather patterns is so significant, not just for our comfort, but also for our economy. And it's why I am proud to offer my amendment, Mr. Chairman. So this amendment ensures that the Aviation Weather Center is able to, the maximum extent possible, quickly disseminate important weather information to airports across the country. I'm going to put on my transportation infrastructure hat on for just a second, but not too long so you all don't kick me off. But having accurate data will ensure that airports can reduce delays for travelers flying home to their families. Think about this during the holiday season because they and the airlines need to have accurate information to make informed decisions about their flight schedules. Most of us sitting here in this chamber are all too familiar with the effects of weather delay on travel, especially those of us who have the luxury and pleasure of flying out of DCA. So especially in Ohio when snow can quickly roll in from the Great Lakes, and if you've ever experienced lake effect snow, God bless you, glad to see that you are still here with us. The impacts on our flight schedules can be very problematic, and being able to accurately disseminate this information from our radars and flight controllers will really help a world of difference, making traveling much more easier and predictable, especially during the winter months. So, Mr. Chairman, I urge my colleagues to support this amendment. Thank you very much, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. The chair now recognizes himself for 5 minutes on the amendment. I thank the gentlewoman from Ohio, Ms. Sykes, for offering this amendment. At the end of the day, as a federal agency, NOAA's work is for the people. All the data, models, forecasting, and everything in between belongs to the taxpayer because it's paid for by the taxpayer. This amendment ensures ensures that aviation weather data is no exception and gets into the hands of aviators and pilots who need it the most urgently. I support this amendment and I urge its adoption. I yield back. The chair now recognizes the ranking member for 5 minutes on this amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to thank Representative Sykes for a really important amendment. Except for those of us on the committee who can drive or take the train, most of us are in airplanes every week. And like our constituents who are in air travel, we understand the importance of this information. It's a good amendment. I urge its adoption and yield back.
Does any other member wish to be recognized to speak on the amendment? Hearing no others, the question is on agreeing on the Sykes Amendment number 48. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed say no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do indeed have it, and the amendment is agreed to. The next amendment on the roster is offered by the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Sorensen. The clerk shall report Sorensen Amendment number 27.
Amendment to H.R. 6093, offered by Mr. Sorensen of Illinois.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read, and the gentleman from Illinois is recognized to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Chairman Lucas. This is one of the greatest days of my life. As we consider the Weather Act reauthorization, all my life I've wanted to be a meteorologist, and it has only been recently that I was given the honor to serve my hometown in Congress. My job was and still is to help my neighbors make good decisions. As meteorologists, we use data and modeling to predict how a weather event will unfold. However, our forecasting is only as good as the models that generate the scenarios. Imagine if weather models could learn from past storms. Today, I offer an amendment to support NOAA and the National Weather Service as they work to improve models through reanalysis and reforecasting. Look, there's two different ways that you can forecast the weather. Number one, use numerical models which utilize the observation data at a given date. Number two, we can use historical data to make forecasts, because a storm in 1985 can and will happen again. We just have to recognize it. And so we have to develop this technology. The impact is so immense. To use a real-life example, in 2020, a derecho hit the Quad Cities in my district. Derechos are produced by extreme thunderstorms with strong surface winds that pose an extreme risk to human life and property. The process for the formation of these types of thunderstorms is understood partly because we have the models to help forecast them. The model knows more because it's learning more. On the other hand, forecasting an extreme storm like this is more challenging and less understood, partly due to the imprecise nature of the model. We need better models that utilize this 2020 storm to find the conditions when they are ready for it to happen again. My amendment will further empower the National Weather Service and all meteorologists by giving them better data. Meteorologists, in turn, will provide our neighbors with the best available information so they can stay safe during bad weather. I urge adoption of this amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes on the amendment. The gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Sorensen, and I thank him for offering this amendment. The National Weather Service Center in Norman, Oklahoma, hosts the Hazardous Weather Test Bed, which tests and evaluates new forecast models, techniques, and products in real time and during live weather scenarios. This amendment supports that reanalysis and reforecasting activities that go hand in hand that create a proven model. I support his amendment and I urge its adoption, and I yield back and recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So far as I know, Mr. Sorensen is the only weatherman in our Congress, and maybe the first weatherman in his Congress. And because of that, his insight is especially appreciated. This amendment follows the recommendation from NOAA's Science Advisory Board, but I think his understanding of the value of the reanalysis and reforecasting techniques is very important to this committee and to Congress, and I thank him for the amendment. I support it, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. Does any other member wish to be recognized to speak on the amendment? Hearing no others, the question is on agreeing to the Sorensen Amendment number 27. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do indeed have it, and the amendment is agreed to. The next amendment on the roster is offered by the by Mr. Strong and Ms. Ross.
He's right here.
Okay, the clerk will report the Strong-Ross Amendment number 31. Please.
Amendment to H.R. 6093, offered by Mr. Strong of Alabama and Ms. Ross of North Carolina.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read, and the gentlelady is recognized to explain the amendment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member Lofgren, and thank you for holding this markup on this very important bill. I've learned even more how important it is by sitting next to Congressman Sorensen. I'm pleased to co-lead this amendment introduced by my colleague, Congressman Strong of Alabama. Simply put, the National Weather Service is chronically understaffed, and its employees are overworked. The National Weather Service has seen a 15% decrease in its number of non-managerial employees over the past decade. Over 80% of employees said that they felt some sort of burnout in 2022. These problems can hinder the National Weather Service's ability to effectively communicate weather events to the public. I'm proud to have visited 2 National Weather Service forecasting offices in North Carolina, one in my district and one in Congressman Rouser's district. In both Raleigh and Wilmington, I visited with our outstanding forecasters to learn about the work they do to protect lives, property, commerce, aviation, and much more. I've also learned about how staffing shortages impact their employees whose work might be affected in accomplishing their mission. Our bipartisan amendment directs the National Weather Service to annually assess and submit to Congress the milestones, timelines, and service level expectations required for speedy hiring and timely onboarding of National Weather Service employees. It also directs the National Weather Service to contract or continue to partner with an external organization to assess the medical impacts, including stress and mental health, on National Weather Service employees who are required to work rotating shifts. Moreover, the amendment authorizes the director of the National Weather Service to designate at least one hydrologist at each weather forecast office. This amendment will help the National Weather Service hire, retain, and support its employees so that when severe weather occurs, the National Weather Service will continue the highly capable warning of the American public. I urge my colleagues to support this bipartisan amendment and the underlying bill. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman of Alabama, Mr. Strong, to speak to the amendment for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This bill we're considering here today is an important step forward for the country's weather prediction and forecasting capabilities. My amendment is focused on an extremely critical piece of that effort, the workforce of the National Weather Service. The National Weather Service is made up of roughly 4,400 employees, many of whom staff the 122 weather forecast offices around the clock 365 days a year. Those employees, including the staff, the Weather Forecast Office in Huntsville, Alabama, are the unsung heroes of the weather enterprise. They are the people who issue life-saving public forecasts and alerts during the most dangerous weather events, like the largest and deadliest tornado outbreak in U.S. history, in which hit my district in North Alabama in 2011. 350 homes were totally destroyed. There were thousands left with major damage, and 9 of my neighbors lost their life. Yet the National Weather Service has over 500 fewer employees than it did 12 years ago when that tornado outbreak took 249 lives in Alabama. This is why I'm offering this amendment, which will do several things to ensure the National Weather Service staff is maximizing their contributions to meeting the agency's life-saving mission. First, this amendment requires the Director of the National Weather Service to annually address and submit to Congress the milestones, timelines, and service level expectations for hiring and onboarding of National Weather Service employees. If the National Weather Service cannot meet these requirements, the National Weather Service Director can recommend outsourcing, hiring to a third-party provider. This will address the disturbing trend of National Weather Service being fully funded by Congress, but still having vacancy rates where National Weather Service employees are unable to perform key tasks. This will help places like Huntsville Weather Forecasting Office, which is co-located with NASA and the University of Alabama Huntsville Atmospheric Science Department, and has unique staffing needs as a rare collaboration of both research and operational meteorologists. Additionally, the National Weather Service Director will report on the number of staff at each weather forecast office to adequately protect lives and property in each geographic region. The severe weather events in North Alabama are not the same as Cheyenne, Wyoming. The staff of each forecast office should be flexible to accommodate that. This amendment also requires the assessment of medical impacts, including stress and long-term health impacts on National Weather Service employees. Many weather forecast office employees work long rotating shifts, including through the middle of the night, and have tremendous responsibilities to accurately predict severe weather events that can cause casualties to their own neighbors. As a first responder myself, and having experience responding to major tornadoes as far back as 1989, I know the toll these activities can take on you both physically and mentally. It's not a small feat to witness death and destruction on the job, go to sleep, and then have to do it all over again the next day. This assessment will identify the most pressing health needs, attempt to mitigate the impacts, and make recommendations to improve our weather workforce. Lastly, this amendment directs each weather forecast office to designate at least one service hydrologist position. This position will be the foremost expert on hydrology and water and be responsible for all the products and services the National Weather Service provides to predict and respond to flood events. Many towns and cities in North Alabama lie directly on the banks of the Tennessee River, and many of my constituents depend on this river for business and recreation. To this day, many of them still recall the floods of 1973, which saw the waters reach as high as 26 feet. An established service hydrologist position at the Huntsville Weather Forecast Office and elsewhere will communicate any future risk of a similar event and ensure all communities are prepared for a severe weather event. This amendment is extremely impactful to my district as well as the entire country. The network of 122 weather forecast offices is a crown jewel of our country that protects every citizen, and we should ensure we maintain a modern, flexible workforce to operate them. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes himself for 5 minutes on the amendment. I'll take the liberty of adding the gentleman from Alabama didn't just simply respond to a tornado in 1989. He went above and beyond to the point that he was awarded the Public Safety Officer Medal of Valor for his service during that event. I support this amendment, and I thank my colleagues, Mr. Strong and Ms. Ross, for co-leading this amendment in a bipartisan fashion. With that, I yield back. Does any other member wish to be recognized to speak on the amendment? The ranking member is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, just briefly, like you, I appreciate Representatives Strong and Ross for this an important amendment. We all know that when there's an emergency, people rally around, but it can really have an impact on the staff. So this is an important amendment. I support it and urge its adoption. I yield back.
Does any other member wish to be heard on the amendment? The gentleman is recognized, Ms. Sorensen, for 5 minutes.
I support this amendment. We're seeing increasing levels of severe weather occurrences in both North Carolina and in Huntsville, Alabama, as you know. I am so pleased to hear that this amendment will also focus on the mental health care of the meteorologists who are forecasting and living through these disasters as they affect northern portions of Alabama and around the world. And so we need to make sure that the National Weather Service is adequately funded because countless lives are saved by their hard work and dedication.
Gentleman yields back. Does any other member wish to be recognized, speak on the amendment? Hearing none, the question is agreeing on the Strong-Ross Amendment number 31. All in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed say nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do indeed have it, and the amendment is agreed to. The next amendment on the roster is offered by the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Posey. The clerk shall report Posey Amendment number 54.
Amendment to H.R. 6093, offered by Mr. Posey of Florida.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read, and the gentleman from Texas is recognized to explain the amendment on behalf of Mr. Posey. Mr. Babin,
Yes,
5
sir.
minutes.
Mr. Chairman, seek recognition on behalf of Mr. Posey for an amendment.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
All right, thank you. My amendment on behalf of Mr. Posey will require security policies and procedures for the University Consortium section of this bill. It is the same research security language that is in Section 108 that is in the bill now. And I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Awesome statement. The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the ranking member to speak on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree that the research activities authorized under this act should be subject to the government-wide requirements that were the product of months of bipartisan, bicameral negotiation during the CHIPS and Science Act. I support the amendment and yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes. I want to thank the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Posey, for offering this amendment to protect the United States research and intellectual property. I support this amendment and urge its adoption and yield back. Does any other member wish to be recognized on the amendment? Hearing none others, the question is agreeing to Posey Amendment number 54. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed signify by saying no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do indeed have it. The next amendment on the roster is offered by the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Frost. The clerk will read Frost Amendment number 18.
Amendment to H.R. 6093, offered by Mr. Frost of Florida and Mr. Webster of Florida.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read, and the gentleman from Florida is recognized to explain his amendment.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. The Weather Act reauthorization before us today is life-saving legislation. Passing this bill means our communities are better prepared for all weather. Our amendment works to keep our most at-risk communities safe during extreme weather events. That's why I'm offering this bipartisan amendment with my colleague from the great state of Florida, Congressman Webster. This amendment is also, it's our legislation, the Fixing Gaps in Hurricane Preparedness Act, aimed at saving the lives of seniors, folks with disabilities, non-English speakers during hurricanes. It instructs NOAA to evaluate people's level of preparedness in hurricane-prone areas, to better understand how certain at-risk populations receive, interpret, and react to emergency notifications, including seniors, folks with disabilities, communities with language barriers, and rural, suburban, and urban populations. And finally, it examines the unique risks to areas with large senior populations, including retirement communities before, during, and after a hurricane. And as someone from Florida, we have a lot of retirement communities that we want to make sure that we keep safe. This amendment was inspired by the devastating national data and conversations that we've had with Central Floridians. They spoke of living in neighborhoods that quickly flood, confusing messages from the media, alerts that are usually just in English or Spanish, fears of being stranded because they're unable to drive, or not knowing what's more dangerous, potentially inaccessible shelters or being trapped at home. While inspired by the needs of our constituents in Florida, this amendment's going to help folks far beyond our state. Hurricanes and tropical storms affect the entire Gulf and East Coast, made up of 18 of our most populous states. California also faced a hurricane this year. Tropical systems can still kill as they move inland, and rain from tropical storms have killed dozens in Tennessee, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania. When these storms come, people with disabilities must undergo evacuations at far greater rates than others, yet folks told me they feel like an afterthought when it comes down to these accommodations. And for seniors and folks with disabilities, being struck without electricity can mean extreme and deadly heat, life-sustaining medical equipment that goes dead, or vital medication that spoiled seniors are actually much more likely to die during a hurricane. 2/3 or most of the deaths and fatalities from Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Florence, Hurricane Ian that we had just last year were people over the age of 60 years old. The research and evaluation this amendment requires will save lives, reduce fear, and help our constituents, first responders, and medical professionals better prepare for these hurricanes. I ask my colleagues to support this bipartisan amendment, and thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes himself for 5 minutes. I simply want to thank the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Frost, and Mr. Webster for working together on this amendment that will greatly benefit their state and many others. I support this amendment, and I urge its adoption, and I yield back. Chair recognizes the ranking member for 5 minutes.
I would just like to join the chairman in supporting the amendment. It's really smart to try and think about not just what we're saying to people, but how that information is being heard. So this is an important amendment. I urge its adoption and yield back.
The ranking member yields back. Does any other member wish to be recognized to speak on the amendment? Hearing no others, the question is on agreeing to Frost Amendment number 18. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do indeed have it, and the amendment is agreed to. The next amendment on the roster is offered by the gentlewoman from Virginia, Ms. McClellan. The clerk will report McClellan Amendment number 27.
Amendment to H.R. 6093, offered by Ms. McClellan of Virginia.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read, and the gentlewoman from Virginia is recognized to explain her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the work that you and Ranking Member Loughran have done in drafting this important Weather Act reauthorization. Now more than ever, it is critical that we have modern and reliable weather systems. With climate change, we've seen an increase in extreme weather events, including more severe storms, floods, and wildfires. Storms result in the loss of many lives and irrevocable harm to even more, devastating in physical, emotional, and financial well-being of millions of people in the United States every year. I applaud the provisions of this bill that will improve our understanding of storms, including post-storm surveys and assessments. However, it's important to recognize that storm impacts are not felt equally among all communities. In order to fully rebuild and increase resilience to future storms, we have to focus on communities that have been left behind in the past. Currently, the bill directs the Undersecretary to increase the number of post-storm community impact studies. My amendment adds an emphasis on studies in underserved, underobserved, and highly vulnerable communities. Low-income communities, communities of color, tribal and indigenous communities are often located in areas that are more vulnerable to extreme weather events. Furthermore, these communities have less resilient infrastructure and more limited resources for preparation and recovery, which can contribute to health disparities in the aftermath. It is essential that we understand and prioritize the needs of those who are most at risk and who have the least capacity to recover in the wake of storms. With additional studies on these populations, we can improve the well-being of communities by centering their perspectives and developing tailored solutions to mitigate storm damage. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment to ensure the most severely impacted communities are prioritized post-storm. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. I recognize myself for 5 minutes on the amendment. I want to thank the gentlewoman from Virginia, Ms. McClellan, for offering this amendment, which will benefit many vulnerable communities in Oklahoma, too, that are subject to severe weather events. And I support this amendment, urge its adoption, yield back, and recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes on the amendment.
I would like also to thank Representative McClellan for this amendment. Just thinking to my own congressional district, we had a rural community that was very hard hit in the flooding. We need to make sure that all communities are paid attention to, and this amendment will ensure that, and I support it and yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Does any other member wish to be recognized to speak on the amendment? Hearing no others, the question is on agreeing to the McClellan Amendment number 27. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do indeed have it, and the amendment is agreed to. The last amendment on the roster is, and did I note that? The last amendment on the roster is offered by the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Jackson. The clerk shall report Jackson Amendment number 27.
Amendment to H.R. 6093, offered by Mr. Jackson of North Carolina.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read, and the gentleman from North Carolina is recognized to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Chairman Lucas. We've made a lot of progress in forecasting climate and weather events. However, predicting precipitation has still proven challenging. Inability to predict extreme precipitation events can hamper communities' abilities to prepare and respond to these events. My amendment will codify the Precipitation Forecast Improvement Program at NOAA by improving our understanding of precipitation extremes, increasing the accuracy of precipitation modeling, and increasing access to this data. This amendment is a substantial step towards improving precipitation forecasting and response across the United States. I urge all of my colleagues to support this amendment. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes. I thank the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Jackson, for offering this amendment. There are a few industries that watch the estimation and forecasting of precipitation more closely than the agricultural industry. This amendment tasks NOAA with critical work that I personally will appreciate when working my other profession back home in Roger Mills County. I support this amendment, urge its adoption, yield back, and recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also appreciate this amendment by Mr. Jackson. Not only is it important in terms of preventing or understanding the risk of floods, for example, the atmospheric rivers that hit the West Coast, but also I think of the agricultural industry in my district, in Monterey County, and the Salinas Valley, and Pajaro Valley. The precipitation is critical for them as well. So this is an important amendment. I urge its adoption, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Does any other member wish to be recognized to speak on the amendment? Hearing none, the question is agreeing to the Jackson Amendment number 27. All in favor will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed will say no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do indeed have it, and the amendment is agreed to. There were no other amendments pre-filed in this bill. Does any member wish to offer an amendment at this time?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to strike the last word, and I see our staff on both sides of the aisle. I'd just like to thank them for their hard work. We have once again had a bipartisan effort, and we all work at it, but the staff really deserves a lot of credit, and I just wanted to mention that. I know you share that view.
The gentlelady is absolutely correct, and we have an outstanding group of people on both sides of the aisle. With that, hearing no other amendments, we will proceed for the first time to vote by electronic device. Before we proceed to vote, I would note to my colleagues, you must be in the room to vote. I and the clerk have to be able to see you. Please do not take these devices or we will strip search you in the future. Okay. So go ahead and press any button on your device that will wake it up, so to speak, and then we'll proceed to the vote. Hearing none, we'll proceed to the vote. Hearing none and a reporting quorum being present, I move the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology report H.R. 6093, the Weather Act Reauthorization Act of 2023, as amended to the House with the recommendation that the bill be approved. So the clerk will now activate the machine. What? Oh, you're right. I understand. The question is on favorably reporting H.R. 6093 as amended to the House. We'll first do a voice vote, and then we'll proceed electronically. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the bill is ordered reported.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask for a recorded vote, please.
The gentleman has requested a recorded vote. The clerk will please open the vote, and we will proceed with the vote when the clerk's ready. And we are. The chair would note to my colleagues while we are voting that the ranking member and I will be here for a bit to allow members who may be down the hallway to come vote in person. Vote is underway. And once you voted, you may leave. Are there any members wishing to vote or change their vote? Seeing none, the clerk shall close the vote and report the results.
Mr. Chairman, on this vote, the ayes are 31 and the nays are 0.
The ayes have it, and H.R. 6093 as amended is favorably reported to the House. Without objection, I ask the staff to be authorized to make any necessary technical and conforming changes to these bills. Seeing none, so ordered. Members will have 2 calendar days to submit supplemental, minority, or additional views on these measures. And I want to express my appreciation for our colleagues working together on this new process, which should help expedite the legislative matters. And with that, no further business is before the committee. The committee stands adjourned.